This time I'd like to focus once more in our shorter catechism on the first commandment. We are now looking on the more negative side of the commandment in terms of what it prohibits. So we'll look at two questions, numbers 47 and 48. What is forbidden in the first commandment? The first commandment forbiddeth the denying or not worshiping and glorifying the true God as God and our God, and the giving of that worship and glory to any other, which is due to Him alone. Question 48. What are we specially taught by these words, before me, in the first commandment? The answer is, these words, before me, in the first commandment, teach us that God, who seeth all things, taketh notice of, and is much displeased with, the sin of having any other God. You may have heard that in communist China there's been a great effort to suppress Orthodox Christianity throughout the country. There is a place for the state church and where people can gather together to worship the three-self God there, but churches that are not willing to submit to the state's control over them come under persecution and affliction. You may have also heard that China is imposing on the churches hymns to the Chinese leader, celebrating him as though he were a god. We see that mankind constantly seeks to elevate man at the expense of God. There is always an effort to worship man and what he is able to accomplish. It may be Xi Jinping, it may be someone else. But there is a God of the system. And the question is, who is that God? Who is the one in power? And what laws do they intend to impose on others? We are confronted with the Lord our God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, and the redeemer of his people here in the first commandment. And so the first commandment goes contrary to the wishes and impulses of the human heart, which seek to elevate human nature or some element of the creation. This God opposes all such worship. It is false. It is fruitless. Indeed, it brings upon men his wrath. And so God opposes these things, all these different forms of worship, whether it is in a humanistic science or a humanistic religion, a form of self-deification that denies the existence of God, or a pantheistic view of the world that sees God in everything, no matter what religious belief you may hold to. These kinds of ideas are rejected by this first commandment. We are to worship and glorify only the true God and no other. And so that is our responsibility to this God. We are to worship Him. Worship is part of our everyday experience. We either worship and serve the creature or the Creator. And so in our work efforts during the week, in our worship on a Sunday morning, the question is, who is uppermost in your mind and your thoughts? We should give praise and glory to God, the true God, and not abide with false gods. Catechism reminds us as well that we are to live life before God. We are always living in the view of God. He sees everything that we do. There is nothing that escapes His notice. And so, as we worship God, we must not allow any other gods before Him. God sees everything we do. And so this side of the commandment reminds us that God not only sees what we do actively, outwardly, like the Athenians who had gods all over their streets and various street corners where they would bow down and worship and provide some incense and that sort of thing, but He also sees the heart, the idols of the heart. And here too, God says, you shall not have any other gods before me. There may be many different idols of the heart, covetousness and idolatry that develop within the heart. That too must be addressed. and repented of. And so whatever you elevate as more important than your service to God must be repented of. And we must yield ourselves over to the true God and His service. So God is displeased with the sin of having any other God. We cannot make a compromise with other foreign deities. Remember, that was the sin of Israel long ago. They welcomed all different kinds of deities. They were pluralists in their religious experience. They would worship the true God in their own way, and then they would go off and worship the Baals and the other gods who were within the broader community, thinking that they would be satisfying people, really, and whatever gods that are out there. God requires one worship, the worship of Him, and all else